For my birthday, my wife's father gifted me divorce papers. From all of us, your wife's new husband will take it from here, he announced at the restaurant. My wife recorded my reaction for their entertainment. I thanked her, signed them immediately, and walked out. She had no idea what I'd already done. You know how they say life comes at you fast? Well, mine decided to take a sledgehammer to my face on my birthday, and apparently, my loving family thought Bellagio's Steakhouse was the perfect venue for my public execution. Because nothing says happy birthday like getting served divorce papers with your medium rare ribeye, am I right? I should have seen it coming the moment I walked into that overpriced temple of red leather and crystal chandeliers. The whole clan was already seated around our usual corner table. You know, the one with the perfect acoustics for maximum humiliation. My father-in-law Gregory was practically vibrating with excitement, like a kid on Christmas morning who knows he's about to unwrap the PlayStation he's been begging for all year. The man was wearing his best, "I'm about to destroy your entire existence" smile, and honestly, it was a good look on him. Really brought out the sadistic gleam in his eyes. Isabel, my darling wife of 12 years, was already positioned with her phone in hand like she was some sort of TMZ correspondent ready to catch the money shot. Her perfectly manicured fingers were wrapped around that rose gold iPhone case I'd bought her for our anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. She kept adjusting her angle, making sure she had the perfect view of what was about to go down. Adrian, her younger brother and professional kiss ass, was slouched back in his chair with that trademark smirk that made him look like he'd just farted in an elevator and was waiting for someone else to smell it. And Clara, sweet Clara, the family's designated neutral party, was suddenly fascinated by her salad, picking at those organic greens like they held the secrets of the universe. The whole setup felt like a badly scripted reality TV show. You know the kind, where they bring you on thinking you're getting a makeover, but surprise, you're actually getting ambushed by your cheating ex and a panel of judgmental housewives. Except this wasn't television, this was my life, and these people weren't actors, they were my family. Well, technically Isabel's family, but after 12 years of marriage, the lines get blurred. Until they don't. Well, Gregory announced, rising from his chair like he was about to deliver the Gettysburg Address. The man had always had a flair for the dramatic, probably comes from spending 30 years in corporate law, where every conversation is a performance and every handshake is a power play. He reached into his briefcase with the ceremonial precision of a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. Except this rabbit was about to bite me in the ass. We have something special for the birthday boy. The envelope was heavy. Not your typical Hallmark card heavy, but serious business heavy. The kind of weight that comes with official seals and legal jargon and the power to completely fuck up your day. It was cream-colored, expensive looking, with my name written across the front in Gregory's pretentious calligraphy. The man probably spent more on that envelope than most people spend on groceries. From all of us, he continued, his voice carrying that self-satisfied tone he usually reserved for closing million-dollar deals. The bastard was practically glowing with pride, like he'd just invented fire or discovered a new planet. Your wife's new husband will take it from here. And there it was. The punchline. The big reveal. The moment they'd all been building up to, probably for weeks. I could practically hear the drumroll in my head as the words sank in. Your wife's new husband. Not ex-husband. Not former spouse. New husband. As in, replacement. As in, upgrade. As in, thanks for keeping the seat warm, but we found someone better. The restaurant went dead silent. You know that moment in movies when the record scratches and everyone turns to stare? Yeah, that actually happens in real life. And let me tell you, it's about as comfortable as it sounds. I could feel every set of eyes in the place boring into me, waiting for the show to begin. The couple at the table next to us had stopped mid-bite, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The waiter who'd been approaching with our wine selection made a sharp U-turn and disappeared behind a pillar. Even the ambient jazz music seemed to fade into the background, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Isabel's phone was steady as a rock, recording every second of what she clearly expected to be my complete emotional breakdown. I could practically see the hashtags forming in her head. Hashtag divorced at 40, hashtag birthday fail, hashtag by Felicia. She was probably already planning her TikTok caption, maybe something about leveling up, or choosing herself, or whatever empowerment bullshit was trending that week. Adrian leaned forward in his chair, his smirk widening like the Cheshire Cat's. This was better than Christmas for him. Finally, the loser brother-in-law was getting what he deserved. Finally, the family embarrassment was being officially shown the door. I could almost hear his internal monologue, about time Dad did something about the dead weight. Clara kept her eyes down, but I caught her stealing glances, probably trying to gauge whether she should feel sorry for me or join in on the family celebration. The eternal fence-sitter, Our Clara never met a middle ground she couldn't occupy like it was rent-controlled real estate. But here's the thing about ambushes, they only work if your target doesn't see them coming. And Gregory, for all his legal brilliance and strategic planning, had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. They all had. They saw what they wanted to see. The struggling small business owner. The guy who didn't quite measure up to their country club standards. The man who'd somehow tricked their precious Isabel into marrying beneath herself. What they didn't see was the storm that had been brewing behind my calm exterior for months. What they didn't know was that while they'd been planning my destruction, I'd been building something else entirely. Something bigger. Something untouchable. Something that was going to make this little dinner theater performance look like amateur hour. I reached for the envelope with steady hands, my fingers tracing the expensive paper. Gregory was practically bouncing on his heels, waiting for the tears, the pleading, the desperate attempts to salvage whatever dignity I had left. Isabel zoomed in with her camera, not wanting to miss a single moment of my humiliation. They thought they'd cornered me. They thought this was checkmate. They had no idea that while they'd been playing checkers, I'd been playing chess. And I was about to show them what a real endgame looked like. You know that moment in action movies when the hero does something completely unexpected and the entire room just freezes? When everyone's jaw drops and the bad guys suddenly realize they might have picked the wrong target. Well, welcome to my Academy Award moment, courtesy of Bellagio's Steakhouse and a heavy cream envelope that was supposed to be my funeral shroud. I opened that envelope like I was checking my monthly electric bill, casual, unhurried, maybe even a little bored. The papers inside were crisp and official, smelling like expensive law offices and broken dreams. Divorce papers. The real deal. Gregory's masterpiece, complete with all the legal bells and whistles that would supposedly leave me financially gutted and emotionally destroyed. I could practically see the billable hours reflected in each perfectly formatted paragraph. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me as I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a pen, not just any pen, mind you, but the Mont Blanc fountain pen Isabel had given me for our 11th wedding anniversary. For all your important documents, she'd said with that sweet smile I used to believe was genuine. Because important moments deserve important tools. Well, honey, it doesn't get more important than this. Gregory was standing there like a prosecutor who'd just delivered his closing argument to a jury he knew he had in the bag. His chest was puffed out, his chin raised at that arrogant angle he'd perfected over decades of looking down on people he considered beneath him. Isabel had her phone positioned for the perfect shot, probably planning to catch the exact moment my world crumbled, maybe slow-mo it for dramatic effect on her social media. Adrian was practically rubbing his hands together with glee, like he was watching his favorite team about to score the winning touchdown. And Clara? Sweet, conflicted Clara was still playing with her salad, but I could see her peripheral vision working overtime, not wanting to miss the show, but too chicken to watch it head on. Here's what they expected. Tears. Begging. Maybe some dramatic pleading about how we could work things out, how marriage is sacred, how we've built a life together. They wanted me to grovel, to make a scene, to give them the satisfaction of watching me break down in front of a restaurant full of strangers. They wanted their money's worth from this elaborate performance. What they got instead was me clicking that pen with the satisfaction of a man about to sign the deal of a lifetime. I flipped through the pages methodically, scanning the legalese with the kind of attention you'd give a dinner menu at Denny's. Irreconcilable differences, check. Division of assets, hilarious, but check. Spousal support, now that was comedy gold, but check. Every page was exactly what Gregory thought would destroy me. And every page was exactly what I needed to set myself free. My signature was neat, precise, confident. The kind of signature that belongs on contracts worth millions, not the shaky scrawl of a broken man. I took my time with each page, making sure every I was dotted and every T was crossed. Professional. Businesslike. Final. The silence in that corner of the restaurant was deafening. It was like someone had hit the mute button on reality. I could hear my own breathing, the scratch of the pen on paper, the faint jazz music that seemed to be playing from another dimension. Even the kitchen noise felt muted, like the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Gregory's confident smile started to flicker, just a little twitch at the corner of his mouth, like he was trying to solve a math problem that wasn't adding up the way it should. Isabel's phone was still recording, but I could see her hands starting to shake, not from emotion, but from confusion. This wasn't going according to script. The star of their show was improvising, and they had no idea how to handle it. Adrian's smirk was frozen in place like someone had hit pause on his face. He kept looking between me and his father, waiting for some signal about how he should react. The family cheerleader suddenly didn't know which team was winning. When I finished signing the last page, I closed the document folder with a satisfying thud and slid it back across the table to Gregory. The sound it made against the white tablecloth was like a gavel hitting wood, final, decisive, done. I looked up at him with the kind of smile you give someone who's just done you a huge favor they didn't mean to do. "Thank you," I said, and I meant every syllable. This is exactly what I needed. If the silence before had been deafening, this was like someone had sucked all the air out of the room. Gregory's face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and something that might have been the first glimmer of fear. His hand was still extended toward the papers like he couldn't quite process that I'd actually signed them. Isabel's phone was definitely shaking now. I could see her trying to process what had just happened, her perfectly planned viral moment turning into something she hadn't scripted. The tears she'd expected from me were nowhere to be found, but I was starting to see some moisture in her own eyes. Not sadness, but panic. Adrian looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus wasn't real. His mouth was hanging open in that attractive way that really showcased his expensive dental work. Clara had finally looked up from her salad, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth, like she'd forgotten how to eat. I reached into my wallet and pulled out 2 crisp $100 bills, money I'd earned from the empire they knew nothing about, and placed them neatly next to my untouched steak. The gesture was deliberate, theatrical, the financial equivalent of dropping the mic. $200 for a meal I hadn't eaten, but it was worth every penny for the look on their faces. "Enjoy the rest of dinner," I said as I stood up, smoothing down my jacket with the casual confidence of a man who'd just won the lottery. My part's finished. The beauty of the moment wasn't just in their shock, it was in the ripple effect spreading through the restaurant. Other diners who'd been pretending not to watch were now openly staring. Whispers started at tables across the room like a virus of curiosity spreading through the dining room. The couple next to us was leaning toward each other, probably trying to piece together what they'd just witnessed. I could hear fragments of conversation as I walked away. "Did he just? Was that really? Oh my God, did you see?" The gossip mill was already churning, and by tomorrow, this story would be all over town. But not the story they'd planned to tell. As I made my way toward the exit, I could feel their eyes burning into my back. I knew they were still sitting there, frozen in their chairs, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Their perfectly orchestrated ambush had just backfired in spectacular fashion, and they didn't have a plan B. The maitre d' gave me a knowing nod as I passed, the kind of acknowledgement one professional gives another when they recognize quality work. Even he could appreciate the artistry of what had just happened. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool evening air, and for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe freely. They thought they'd trapped me with those papers. Instead, they just handed me the key to my cage. Life has this funny way of showing you exactly what you need to see, right when you need to see it. Like when you come home early from a business trip and catch your father-in-law red-handed, hunched over your dining room table, like some kind of legal vulture picking at roadkill. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint you the full picture of how I accidentally stumbled into the preview screening of my own assassination. I'd wrapped up meetings in Phoenix a day early. Turned out the client was more eager to sign than expected, and when someone's throwing money at your logistics company, you don't drag your feet. So instead of spending another night in some sterile airport hotel, I caught the red-eye back to Chicago. Figured I'd surprise Isabel. Maybe even do something crazy like cook her breakfast or pretend we still had a marriage worth saving. Yeah, I know, what a romantic fool I was. The house was supposed to be empty. Isabel had mentioned something about spending the day at her sister's, probably planning another one of those girls' trips to Napa Valley that somehow always coincided with my biggest business deals. Funny how that worked out. But as I pulled into our circular driveway, you know, the one with the fancy brick pavers that cost more than most people's cars, I noticed Gregory's silver Mercedes parked like he owned the place. Now, Gregory Holt dropping by unannounced wasn't exactly unusual. The man treated our house like his personal satellite office, complete with the expectation that I should be grateful for his presence. But something felt off about seeing his car there at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. Gregory was many things: arrogant, manipulative, chronically disappointed in his daughter's choice of husband, but he wasn't the type to make social calls during business hours. The guy lived by his calendar like it was scripture, and every minute not billable was a minute wasted. I let myself in through the front door, expecting to find him in the kitchen making himself coffee, or maybe in the living room critiquing our furniture choices. Instead, I heard the rustling of papers coming from the dining room. Our formal dining room that we basically only used for holidays and the occasional dinner party where Isabel felt the need to impress people with our success. What I found when I walked in was better than Christmas morning. There was Gregory, looking like a mad scientist in his natural habitat, sleeves rolled up to reveal those pale, thin arms that had never seen a day of manual labor. His reading glasses were perched low on his nose, and he was holding a red pen like a sword, marking up official-looking documents with the intensity of a professor grading final exams. The papers were spread across our mahogany table. You know, the one Isabel insisted we buy from that overpriced antique shop in Lincoln Park because it made a statement. Well, it was definitely making a statement now, serving as Gregory's personal war room where he was plotting my demise. But here's the kicker, sitting right there at his elbow, like the cherry on top of this whole ridiculous sundae, was a festive birthday envelope. Not just any envelope, mind you, but one of those expensive, cream-colored jobs with fancy lettering that screams special occasion. The kind you use when you want to make sure the recipient knows you spent good money on their destruction. Gregory nearly launched himself into orbit when he saw me standing in the doorway. The man practically levitated out of his chair, papers scattering like startled birds. His face went through about 12 different shades of pale before settling on a sickly green that really brought out the guilt in his eyes. For a guy who'd spent 30 years in corporate law, he sure didn't handle surprise very well. "Oh, you're back early," he stammered, which had to be the understatement of the century. The man was literally caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookies were divorce papers and the jar was my marriage. He started gathering the documents like he was trying to contain a classified information leak. Which, let's be honest, wasn't far from the truth. "Just family paperwork," he said, shoving the papers into that birthday envelope with all the grace of a teenager hiding porn from his parents. "Nothing important. Legal stuff. You know how it is. Right. Family paperwork. Because nothing says routine family business. Quite like your father-in-law camping out in your dining room with a stack of official documents and a red pen, looking like he'd just been caught stealing from the church collection plate." I stood there watching this performance, and I had to give the old bastard credit. He was really committed to the bit. The way he kept adjusting his glasses, the nervous laugh that sounded like air leaking from a tire, the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. It was almost endearing, if you could. Ignore the fact that he was literally planning to ruin my life. That's when Isabel made her grand entrance, stage right. She came waltzing in from the kitchen like she was returning from a casual stroll through the garden, not like she'd been coordinating a sneak attack on her husband with her father. "Oh honey, you're home," she said, and I swear there was a micro pause before honey, like she had to remember what she usually called me. But here's where it gets interesting. Her voice caught, just for a split second, but I caught it. That little hitch that happens when someone gets surprised mid-lie and has to pivot on the fly. She looked at Gregory, then at me, then back at Gregory, and I could practically see the gears grinding in her head as she tried to figure out how much I'd seen. The look they exchanged was priceless. You know that moment in heist movies when two thieves get caught by security and they have to communicate an entire escape plan with just their eyes? That was Gregory and Isabel right there in our dining room, having a full conversation without saying a word. Problem was, they weren't nearly as smooth as they thought they were. Gregory was giving her the abort mission look, all wide eyes and subtle head shakes. Isabel was responding with the how much does he know expression, complete with raised eyebrows and barely perceptible shoulder shrugs. It was like watching a tennis match played entirely with facial expressions, and both players were losing. I just smiled. One of those easy, relaxed smiles you give when everything is perfectly normal and your wife and her father definitely aren't plotting your destruction in your own dining room. "Don't mind me," I said, backing toward the hallway, "just grabbing a shower. Long flight." And I walked away, just like that. No questions, no confrontation, no dramatic scene. I could feel their confusion following me down the hall like a cloud of expensive cologne. They'd been caught red-handed, and instead of calling them out, I just left. It probably scrambled their brains more than if I'd started screaming. The truth was, I'd seen enough. The official papers, the birthday envelope, the guilty looks, the terrible acting, it all painted a pretty clear picture. They were planning something big for my birthday, something that involved legal documents and family coordination. Didn't take a genius to connect those dots. As I headed upstairs, I could hear them whispering furiously in the dining room, probably trying to figure out if their cover was blown. Spoiler alert, it was. But they thought I'd swallowed their family paperwork, story hook, line, and sinker. Poor bastards had no idea they'd just given me the greatest gift possible, advance warning. While they thought they were being sneaky, they'd actually handed me a 3-day head start to prepare for whatever they had planned. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. Sometimes it gives you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. And sometimes, it lets you catch your enemies rehearsing your funeral before they've even dug your grave. You know how some people collect stamps or vintage wines? Well, Gregory Holt collected reasons to hate me. And let me tell you, the man was passionate about his hobby. From the very first time Isabel brought me home to meet the family, I could practically see the disappointment radiating off him like heat from a sidewalk in July. I wasn't what he'd ordered for his precious daughter, and he made damn sure I knew it every single day for the next 12 years. Picture this. 28-year-old me, nervous as hell, standing in the foyer of their Lincoln Park mansion with a bottle of wine that cost me half a week's pay, trying to make a good first impression. I'd spent an hour in Men's Warehouse picking out what I thought was a decent suit, practiced my handshake in the mirror, even rehearsed small talk about the Cubs and the weather. I was ready to charm the pants off these people. Gregory took one look at me, and I swear I could hear the price scanner beeping in his head as he calculated my net worth down to the penny. The handshake lasted exactly 2.3 seconds, long enough to be polite, short enough to communicate that I wasn't worth the full treatment. Then came the smile, that practiced corporate lawyer smile that never quite reached his eyes, the one that said, "I'm being civil because my daughter is watching, but don't mistake this for acceptance." "So," he said, settling into his throne-like leather chair in the living room, "Isabel tells me you run a small business." The way he said small business made it sound like I was selling knockoff watches out of a van in some back alley. Not, "You're an entrepreneur," or "You own a company," but small business, with the emphasis on small, like the word itself was contaminated. I tried to explain what I was building. Harrison Ridge Logistics was just getting started then, but I had vision, plans, contracts in the pipeline. Gregory nodded along with the enthusiasm of a man listening to his dentist explain root canal procedures. "That's nice," he said when I finished, then immediately pivoted to talking about Adrian's latest promotion at his investment firm. "Now there's a young man with a real future. Corner office, company car, profit sharing. That's what I call success." And that became the pattern for every family gathering for the next decade plus. Gregory would introduce me to his friends and colleagues like I was some kind of charity case his daughter had taken pity on. "This is Isabel's husband." Never "This is my son-in-law." Or God forbid, my actual name. "He runs a small business." Delivered with the same tone you'd use to say he collects roadkill for fun. Adrian, the golden boy, ate this shit up like it was birthday cake. The kid was 4 years younger than me, but acted like he was my wise older brother, always ready with advice about how I could elevate my professional game. He'd corner me at family barbecues and Christmas dinners, drink in hand, telling me about his latest deals and client wins, always ending with some variation of, "You should really consider getting into corporate work, man. That's where the real money is." The worst part? Adrian wasn't even particularly good at his job. The guy rode his daddy's connections and his trust fund confidence into a mediocre career at a mid-tier investment firm. But Gregory talked about him like he was the second coming of Warren Buffett. Adrian closed $1 million deal this quarter. Gregory would announce at dinner, usually right after asking me how my little trucking company was doing. Little trucking company. Jesus Christ. Like I was running a single pickup truck and competing with the kid who mows lawns for beer money. Clara, bless her heart, tried to stay neutral in the family Cold War, but her silence was its own kind of betrayal. She'd sit there during these conversations, picking at her food, occasionally throwing me a sympathetic glance but never actually speaking up. Never saying, "Hey Dad, maybe you should give the guy a chance," or actually, "What he's building sounds pretty impressive." Just silence, which in the Holt family dynamic was basically Switzerland, technically neutral, but ultimately useless when you needed an ally. The real tragedy was watching Isabel transform over the years. In the beginning, she was proud of what I was building. She'd brag to her friends about her entrepreneur husband, talk about our future plans, defend my choices when her family got too obnoxious. But constant exposure to Gregory's poison started wearing her down like water on stone. It started small. Little comments about maybe I should consider diversifying my career options. Questions about whether I'd thought about going back to school, getting an MBA, making myself more marketable. Then came the suggestions about job openings at companies where Gregory had connections. "It wouldn't hurt to keep your options open," she'd say, showing me listings for corporate management positions that would have paid well but killed my soul. The turning point came around year 8 of our marriage, at Adrian's engagement party. I was standing by the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching Gregory work the room like the political animal he was, when I overheard him talking to some judge friend of his. "Isabel's husband?" Gregory was saying. "Nice enough fellow, but not much ambition, you know? One of those people who's content to stay small. Isabel deserves better." That's when I realized this wasn't just about business success or social status. This was personal. Gregory genuinely believed I wasn't good enough for his daughter, and he was on a mission to convince everyone else, including Isabel, that he was right. The campaign was subtle but relentless. Every family dinner became an opportunity to highlight my shortcomings compared to Adrian's achievements. Every holiday gathering featured some new story about friends' sons who were doctors or lawyers or executives, always delivered with meaningful glances in Isabel's direction. Gregory was basically running a 12-year advertising campaign designed to convince his daughter she'd married beneath herself. And it worked. Slowly, methodically, like Chinese water torture, it worked. Isabel started viewing my business through her family's lens instead of her own. The pride in her voice, when talking about Harrison Ridge Logistics, turned into embarrassment. The excitement about our future became anxiety about our present. She stopped mentioning my company to her friends and started making excuses about why we couldn't afford certain luxuries. "Maybe you should consider getting a real job," became her new favorite phrase, usually delivered after particularly brutal family dinners where Gregory had been especially creative in his put-downs. "Adrian's making 6 figures, and he's younger than you. Don't you want to provide better for us?" The irony was suffocating. While Gregory was measuring success by salary and corner offices, I was building something that would eventually dwarf everything Adrian could ever achieve. While he was dismissing my small business, I was laying the groundwork for an empire. While they were all looking down on me, I was quietly becoming exactly the kind of success they claimed to respect. They were just too arrogant to notice. But that's the thing about people like the Holts. They're so invested in their own narrative about what success looks like that they can't recognize it when it's happening right under their noses. They were so busy being disappointed in what I wasn't that they never bothered to see what I was becoming. Their contempt became my fuel. Every dismissive comment, every condescending introduction, every family dinner where I was treated like the help, it all went into the furnace that was driving me to build something undeniable. They wanted to see me as small. Fine. I'd let them think that right up until the moment I revealed just how wrong they'd been. You know that moment when you realize the person lying next to you in bed, every night, has been planning your destruction? Yeah. Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because I'm about to tell you exactly what it feels like to have your world implode while you're walking to the kitchen in your boxers looking for a cold beer. It was a Tuesday night in March, one of those Chicago evenings where winter refuses to admit defeat and the wind cuts through you like a knife made of pure misery. I'd spent 14 hours dealing with a supply chain nightmare that had my driver stuck in Iowa and my clients breathing down my neck like rabid dogs. All I wanted was a Sam Adams and maybe 20 minutes of mindless television before crashing into bed and pretending my life wasn't slowly turning into a dumpster fire. Isabel had gone upstairs earlier, claiming she needed to catch up on some reading. Which should have been my first red flag, because the woman hadn't voluntarily opened a book since college unless it was one of those self-help things about finding your authentic self, or whatever bullshit was trending on Oprah's book club that month. But I was too tired to be suspicious, too worn down from years of walking on eggshells to question why my wife was suddenly interested in literature. So there I was, padding down the hallway in my Cubs t-shirt and boxers, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether we had any of those fancy imported beers left in the fridge when I heard her voice drifting down from upstairs. Now normally, I wouldn't have paid any attention. Isabel was always on the phone with somebody, usually Clara or one of her book club friends, discussing the earth-shattering drama of who wore what to which charity luncheon. But something in her tone made me stop. It wasn't her usual gossip voice, all animated and breathless with excitement over someone else's misfortune. This was different. Quieter. More intimate. The kind of voice you use when you're sharing secrets you don't want anyone else to hear. I found myself creeping closer to the bottom of the stairs like some kind of domestic spy, which should have made me feel pathetic, but instead just made me more curious. Call it intuition. Call it paranoia. Call it the survival instinct of a man who'd been slowly drowning in his own marriage for years. Something told me I needed to hear this conversation. "He's holding me back, Dad." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it might as well have been a gunshot in the quiet house. "I can't keep pretending this is working. I can't keep pretending he's enough. Dad." She was talking to Gregory. Of course she was. The puppet master pulling strings from his Lincoln Park mansion, orchestrating his daughter's life like he was directing some tragic opera where I played the villain who needed to be eliminated in the third act. I pressed myself against the wall at the bottom of the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to walk away, to pretend I hadn't heard anything, to go get that beer and forget this conversation ever happened. But I couldn't move. I was frozen there like a statue, listening to my wife dissect our marriage with surgical precision. Adrian's friend Jason lined up that position for me at Morrison & Associates. She continued, and I could hear the excitement creeping into her voice. Senior account manager. Base salary of $120, plus bonuses. Health insurance. Dental. For weeks vacation. I'll be fine without him, Dad. Better than fine. Better than fine. Without me, she'd be better than fine. The woman I'd loved for 12 years, the woman I'd built my life around, the woman who used to trace patterns on my chest while we talked about our future together, was planning her escape like I was some kind of disease she needed to cure. The lawyer says it's straightforward. Gregory's voice was faint, but I could hear the satisfaction in it even through the phone speaker. That bastard was probably sitting in his home office, feet up on his mahogany desk, smoking one of those expensive cigars he brought out for special occasions. Irreconcilable differences. She'll get half the house, spousal support for at least 5 years, and we can argue for a percentage of his business assets. Business assets. They were talking about my company like it was a piñata they were planning to crack open and divvy up the candy. Harrison Ridge Logistics, the thing I'd bled and sweated and sacrificed for. The dream I'd built from nothing while they all looked down their noses at my small business. They were already planning how to carve it up and serve it at their victory dinner. I just need to time it right, Isabel said, and there was something cold in her voice I'd never heard before. Clinical. Calculated. Like she was discussing the weather or planning a grocery run, not the complete destruction of another human being. Maybe his birthday. Make it memorable. Make it memorable. Jesus Christ, they were planning to serve me divorce papers like a birthday cake, probably with candles and everything. The symmetry was almost artistic. Kill off 12 years of marriage on the anniversary of my birth. Gregory probably thought it was poetic justice. He won't see it coming, she continued, and I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. He still thinks we're working through our problems. Still thinks I love him. That's when something inside me broke. Not shattered dramatically like glass hitting concrete, but broke quietly, like a bone fracturing under too much pressure. All those nights I'd lain awake wondering what I could do to fix us. All those conversations where I'd tried to address the growing distance between us. All those times I'd blamed myself for not being the husband she deserved, and she'd been planning my destruction the whole time. The timing is perfect, Gregory was saying. Adrian's promotion party is next week, so we can celebrate the family's success right after we deal with this deadweight. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Deadweight. That's what I was to them. Not a husband who'd loved Isabel since we were kids. Not a man who'd worked his ass off to build something meaningful. Not even a human being deserving of basic respect. Just deadweight to be jettisoned so the Holt family ship could sail on to bigger and better things. I stood there in that hallway, barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, listening to my wife and her father plan my public humiliation with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for planning vacations. They spoke about alimony and asset division like they were discussing investment portfolios. They talked about my business like it was already theirs to claim. But here's the thing about eavesdropping on your own assassination. Sometimes you hear more than the assassins realize they're revealing. Between Gregory's legal strategy and Isabel's financial planning, I was getting a master class in their expectations. They thought they knew what they were dealing with. They thought they had me figured out, cataloged, and priced for quick sale. They had no idea what Harrison Ridge Logistics had become. They had no clue about the contracts I'd signed, the acquisitions I'd made, the empire I'd built while they were busy dismissing me as a failure. They were planning to take half of what they thought was a struggling small business, never imagining they might be trying to steal from a multi-million-dollar operation. As I finally crept away from the stairs and made my way to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I opened that beer, one thought kept echoing in my head. If they wanted to play games, I'd show them what a real player looked like. They wanted to plan my destruction? Fine. But they'd picked the wrong target, and they were about to learn that underestimating your enemy is the first step toward your own defeat. That night, lying in bed next to Isabel as she slept peacefully beside me, probably dreaming about her new job and her freedom and her life without dead weight dragging her down, I started planning my own game. They wanted memorable? I'd give them memorable. They just handed me the greatest gift of all, advance notice of their intentions and a clear understanding of exactly who I was dealing with. The war had begun and they didn't even know they'd fired the first shot. You want to know the beautiful irony of being completely underestimated by people who think they're smarter than you. They stop paying attention to what you're actually doing. While Gregory was busy introducing me as Isabel's husband who runs a small business, and Adrian was patronizing me about getting a real job, I was quietly building something that would make their pathetic little lives look like a lemonade stand in comparison. See, the thing about the Holt family is they measured success in the most predictable, boring ways possible. Corner offices, company cars, 6-figure salaries that they could brag about at country club dinners. They thought success came with a nameplate on your door and a parking space with your name on it. They were playing checkers while I was orchestrating a full-scale chess match that would have made Bobby Fischer weep with admiration. Harrison Ridge Logistics didn't start as a logistics company, technically speaking. It started as me, a beat-up Ford pickup truck, and a burning desire to prove every single one of those smug bastards wrong. But here's what happens when you're motivated by pure spite and have an actual brain in your head. You start seeing opportunities that other people miss entirely. The first big break came about 6 years into my marriage, when I realized that most small manufacturers in the Midwest were getting absolutely screwed by their shipping companies. These mom-and-pop operations were paying premium prices for substandard service, and the big logistics firms couldn't be bothered with accounts that weren't worth millions. So I swooped in with competitive pricing, reliable service, and the revolutionary concept of actually giving a damn about my clients. Word spreads fast in manufacturing circles when you find someone who doesn't treat you like garbage. Within 2 years, I had contracts with 17 companies across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. But instead of getting comfortable and coasting on that success like most people would, I kept my ears open for the next opportunity. That's when I heard about Meridian Transport Solutions going under. They were a mid-sized company that handled specialty medical equipment shipping, basically the Cadillac of logistics services, but their management was so incompetent they couldn't find their own asses with both hands and a GPS. The owners were desperate to sell, and everyone in the industry knew it was a money pit. Everyone except me, apparently. See, while other people saw a failing company with debt problems, I saw a client list that included 3 major hospitals, 2 pharmaceutical companies, and a medical device manufacturer that was about to go public. I bought Meridian for what amounted to pocket change, financed the whole deal through a combination of small business loans and some creative accounting that would have made my college finance professor proud. Gregory probably would have shit himself if he'd known his small business son-in-law had just acquired a company with $12 million in annual contracts. But why would he know? He was too busy being disappointed in me to actually pay attention to what I was accomplishing. The Meridian acquisition was like adding rocket fuel to a campfire. Suddenly, I had access to clients and contracts that most logistics companies spend decades trying to land. But more importantly, I had credibility. When you're shipping life-saving medical equipment, people notice if you do it right. And when people notice, they start recommending you to their friends. That's how I met Colonel James Morrison, U.S. Army Logistics Command, at a medical industry conference in Detroit. The man was complaining to anyone who'd listen about how impossible it was to find reliable civilian contractors who could handle sensitive military shipments without screwing something up or charging the government like they were shipping gold bars to Mars. Most people at that conference nodded politely and changed the subject because military contracts are notoriously complex and bureaucratic nightmares that can destroy companies if you're not careful. But I saw dollar signs and the opportunity to play in the big leagues. I spent the next 3 hours buying Colonel Morrison drinks and proving to him that Harrison Ridge Logistics wasn't just another fly-by-night operation looking to make a quick buck off Uncle Sam. 6 months later, I signed my first Department of Defense contract. Nothing huge, just a $2.3 million deal to handle medical supply shipments to 3 Army bases. But here's the thing about military contracts: if you don't fuck up, they keep giving you bigger ones. And if you consistently exceed expectations, they start treating you like family. Within 18 months, I was handling $15 million worth of DoD contracts annually. Medical supplies, equipment, even some classified materials that I can't talk about without ending up in federal prison. The Pentagon brass loved me because I delivered on time, under budget, and without the usual contractor bullshit that makes their lives miserable. But the real game changer came when Colonel Morrison introduced me to someone at the Defense Logistics Agency who was dealing with a problem that was making headlines in all the wrong ways. Remember that scandal about soldiers overseas not getting proper body armor because the supply chain was completely fucked? Yeah, well, guess who got tapped to fix that particular mess? The contract was worth $80 million over 3 years. $80 million. To put that in perspective, Adrian's impressive 6-figure salary would take him about 800 years to earn what I was making in a single government contract. But did Gregory know about any of this? Of course not. He was too busy being embarrassed by his daughter's choice in husbands to notice that his son-in-law was playing in the same financial league as Fortune 500 companies. Around the same time I was becoming the Pentagon's favorite logistics contractor, I started acquiring other companies. Not flashy acquisitions that would end up in the business pages, but strategic purchases that expanded my capabilities and market reach. A pharmaceutical cold storage company in Indianapolis. A specialized electronics shipping firm in Milwaukee. A hazardous materials transport company in Detroit that nobody wanted because of regulatory headaches. Each acquisition made Harrison Ridge Logistics more valuable and more indispensable to my clients. But I kept the corporate structure intentionally complex, with subsidiaries and holding companies that made it nearly impossible for outsiders to track the full scope of what I was building. To anyone doing a casual search, it still looked like a small regional trucking company. To anyone who actually understood corporate logistics, it was becoming clear that I was assembling something significant. The pharmaceutical contracts alone were worth $30 million annually by year 10 of my marriage. Add in the military deals, the medical equipment shipments, the specialized transport services, and the growing list of manufacturing clients. And Harrison Ridge Logistics was pulling in over $150 million in revenue per year. Not profit, revenue. But in an industry where margins can be substantial if you know what you're doing, those numbers translated to a personal net worth that was climbing toward 8 figures. But here's the beautiful part. While my business was exploding into something that would have impressed even Gregory's corporate lawyer friends, my home life remained exactly the same. Same house, same car, same modest lifestyle that Isabel and her family interpreted as evidence of my continued failure. I wasn't buying expensive toys or flashing cash around like some lottery winner with no sense. I was reinvesting everything back into the company, building an empire that existed entirely under their radar. By the time Isabel started planning my destruction with her dear old dad, Harrison Ridge Logistics had been valued at $1.9 billion. Billion. With AB, the small business that Gregory loved to mock was worth more than most publicly traded companies. But they had no idea because they'd stopped paying attention to me years ago. In their minds, I was still the same struggling entrepreneur they'd been looking down on since day one. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. While they were plotting to take half of what they thought was a failing small business, they were actually planning to steal from a company that could have bought and sold Adrian's entire investment firm without breaking a sweat. But their arrogance had blinded them to what was happening right under their noses. They wanted to play games with someone they thought was weak and desperate. Instead, they picked a fight with someone who had the resources of a small country and absolutely nothing left to lose. You know how they say you should never bring a knife to a gunfight? Well, Rebecca Stanton was the kind of attorney who brought a rocket launcher to a knife fight and then charged the other side for the cleanup. If Gregory Holt thought he was hot shit because he'd spent 30 years pushing paper around corporate boardrooms, he was about to learn what real legal warfare looked like. I first met Rebecca 3 years ago at a conference for defense contractors in Washington, D.C. She was the keynote speaker, talking about asset protection strategies for high net worth individuals who operated in sensitive industries. While most of the audience was probably thinking about their golf games or where they were going for lunch, I was hanging on every word like she was revealing the secrets of the universe. Rebecca wasn't your typical corporate lawyer. She didn't wear those boring navy suits that made everyone look like they'd been dressed by the same funeral director. Instead, she rocked designer outfits that screamed, "I could destroy your entire financial life before my morning coffee gets cold, and I'd look fantastic doing it." Her reputation in legal circles was legendary. They called her the fixer because she specialized in making problems disappear so completely that you'd wonder if they ever existed in the first place. After her presentation, I approached her with what probably sounded like paranoid rambling about wanting to protect my assets from potential future threats that didn't even exist yet. Most lawyers would have looked at me like I was wearing a tinfoil hat and muttered something about calling them if I ever actually needed help. Rebecca listened to my concerns with the intensity of a surgeon planning a complex operation, asked about 6 very specific questions that made me realize she understood my business better than some of my own employees, and handed me her card with a smile that could have melted steel. "Paranoia is just preparation with better marketing," she said. "Let's talk." Our first meeting lasted 4 hours and covered everything from corporate restructuring to international banking laws to estate planning strategies that sounded like they belonged in a spy novel. Rebecca didn't just practice law. She orchestrated it like a composer writing a symphony, with every note carefully placed to create the exact effect she wanted. The thing about asset protection, she explained while sketching out corporate structures on her whiteboard like she was designing a space shuttle, is that you have to build it before you need it. Once someone's already coming after you, your options become limited. But if you plan ahead, well, then you can become essentially untouchable. Untouchable. I like the sound of that. The plan she devised was beautiful in its complexity and terrifying in its thoroughness. First, we restructured Harrison Ridge Logistics into a web of subsidiaries and holding companies spread across multiple states and offshore jurisdictions. Not to hide money or evade taxes. Everything was completely legal and properly reported, but to make it virtually impossible for anyone to understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. Then came the personal asset protection. Rebecca created a series of trusts and legal entities that would make my wealth invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Real estate holdings went into land trusts. Investment accounts were restructured through family limited partnerships. Even my personal bank accounts were repositioned through legal structures that would confuse the hell out of most attorneys, let alone a bitter ex-wife and her pompous father. The key, Rebecca explained during one of our marathon planning sessions, is to make yourself look poor on paper while actually being richer than God. If someone comes after you, they need to know what to target. If they can't see it, they can't take it. But the real masterpiece was the family trust we established with my sister Laura as the primary beneficiary and trustee. Laura, bless her heart, was a high school teacher in Oregon who drove a 10-year-old Honda and thought my business success was moderately impressive but not particularly interesting. She had no idea that signing a few documents had just made her the legal guardian of nearly $2 billion in assets. Your sister seems nice, Rebecca noted after our conference call with Laura to explain her new responsibilities. Very trustworthy. Very normal. Perfect for this kind of arrangement. Normal was exactly what we needed. While Gregory and his legal team would be looking for hidden Swiss bank accounts and offshore shell companies, the reality was much simpler and far more devastating. Everything was sitting in a perfectly legal family trust managed by a woman who spent her evenings grading algebra tests and watching Netflix. The estate planning was where Rebecca really showed her artistic flair. My will was rewritten to be a legal work of art, a document that was simultaneously generous and cruel, detailed and vague, legally bulletproof and emotionally nuclear. Everything went to my niece Sophie, Laura's daughter, who was currently a sophomore at Oregon State University studying veterinary medicine. Sophie would inherit everything when she turned 30, with Laura managing the trust until then. For Isabel, my beloved wife of 12 years, I left exactly $1. But that wasn't the beautiful part. The beautiful part was the letter I attached to the will, a detailed, meticulously documented record of every insult, every slight, every moment of disdain the Holt family had shown me over the years. Names, dates, witnesses, direct quotes whenever possible. It read like an FBI surveillance report, if FBI agents specialized in tracking emotional warfare instead of criminal activity. This is thorough, Rebecca said as she reviewed my documentation. Almost obsessively thorough. I love it. The letter wasn't just cathartic, it was strategic. If Isabel tried to contest the will, claiming I was mentally incompetent or acting under duress, the letter would serve as evidence that my decisions were based on years of rational observation and careful consideration. Every slight was documented, every betrayal was recorded, every moment of contempt was preserved for posterity. Your wife's family thinks they're going to take you to the cleaners, Rebecca said during our final planning session. They have no idea they're about to find out that you don't actually own anything they can touch. Legally speaking, you're going to be poorer than a church mouse. In reality, you'll still control everything through the trust structure, but they won't be able to prove it or access it. She leaned back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. It's like watching someone try to rob a bank that turned out to be a movie set. They're going to break in expecting to find millions and discover they're stealing from an empty vault. The final touch was Rebecca's contingency planning. She prepared press releases, media statements, and legal countermeasures for every possible scenario. If the Holts wanted to play dirty, she was ready to go nuclear. If they wanted to keep things quiet and civilized, she could accommodate that too. But either way, they were going to lose, and they were going to lose spectacularly. The thing about people like your father-in-law, Rebecca explained, is that they're used to winning through intimidation and superior resources. They expect their opponents to fold when faced with expensive legal teams and prolonged court battles. But they've never faced someone who has better lawyers, deeper pockets, and absolutely nothing left to lose. She smiled that predatory smile that had probably given nightmares to opposing counsel across the country. This is going to be fun. By the time Isabel and Gregory started planning my birthday ambush, every piece was already in place. Every asset was protected, every legal strategy was prepared, every contingency was covered. They thought they were setting a trap for an unsuspecting victim. In reality, they were walking into a legal minefield that had been carefully prepared by someone who played this game at a level they couldn't even comprehend. Rebecca called it a legal masterpiece. I called it my insurance policy against a family that had spent 12 years trying to convince me I wasn't good enough for them. They were about to discover that not only was I good enough, I was so far out of their league that they'd need a telescope just to see where I was playing. Have you ever watched bad actors trying to perform Shakespeare? That's what living in my house felt like during the week leading up to my 40th birthday. Everyone was playing their assigned roles in Gregory's grand production, but they were all so terrible at it that I half expected someone to forget their lines and break character mid-scene. Isabel was the worst actress of the bunch, which really says something considering her family's natural talent for deception. The woman who'd been treating me like radioactive waste for months suddenly transformed into the world's most attentive wife. She was humming around the house like a Disney princess, practically skipping through rooms while she planned what she thought would be my public execution. Monday morning, she made me breakfast. Actual breakfast, not just pointing at the cereal boxes and telling me to figure it out myself. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast cut into perfect triangles, fresh orange juice, the whole domestic goddess routine. She even sat across from me at the kitchen table, chin propped on her hands, watching me eat with the intensity of a scientist observing a lab rat. "So," she said, trying to sound casual but overshooting it by about 12 miles, "any thoughts about what you'd like to do for your birthday this year?" I looked up from my eggs, fighting the urge to laugh at the sheer theatrical stupidity of the question. This was the same woman who'd forgotten my birthday entirely 2 years ago and given me a gas station gift card the year before that. Now she was sitting here pretending to care about making my special day memorable. "I don't know," I said, playing along with her little performance. "Nothing too elaborate. Maybe just dinner somewhere nice." Her eyes lit up like someone had just told her she'd won the lottery. "Oh, what about Bellagio's? You always said you loved their steaks. We could make a reservation, maybe invite family. Make it a real celebration." Bellagio's. The same restaurant where she and Gregory had been planning this ambush for weeks. The woman couldn't even be creative in her duplicity. But I nodded. Enthusiastically. Like the idea had never occurred to me. "That sounds perfect. Really thoughtful of you." She beamed at me with pride, probably congratulating herself on her brilliant manipulative skills. If she'd put half this much effort into our actual marriage, we might have had something worth saving. Tuesday brought Gregory's surprise visit. And by surprise, I mean the man showed up at our front door with his briefcase like he was making rounds on his paper route. He'd been dropping by unannounced all week, each visit more transparently staged than the last. Today's excuse was that he wanted to discuss some family financial planning with me. Family financial planning. Right. Because Gregory had spent the last 12 years so concerned about my financial well-being. The man who'd made a career out of introducing me as Isabel's husband who runs a small business suddenly wanted to have heart-to-hearts about my money management strategies. We sat in my home office. Gregory perched on the edge of his chair like he expected to need a quick escape route. His briefcase was positioned next to him with military precision, and he kept glancing at it like it contained nuclear launch codes instead of whatever legal documents he'd brought to gloat over. "You know," he said, crossing his legs and trying to look paternal, "I've been thinking about your business lately. Harrison Ridge Logistics. How's it performing these days?" The question was so loaded it practically came with its own ammunition. Gregory had spent over a decade dismissing my company as irrelevant, and now he was suddenly interested in performance metrics? The man was fishing for information he could use in divorce proceedings, probably trying to get me to admit how little the company was worth so he could lowball the asset division. "Oh, you know," I said with a shrug, "same old stuff. Moving boxes from point A to point B. Nothing too exciting." His smile was sharper than a knife edge. "Well, I hope you've been putting some money aside for the future. You never know what life might throw at you." What life might throw at you? Jesus Christ, the man was practically winking at me. He might as well have added, "like divorce papers at your birthday dinner," to complete the threat. Wednesday was Adrian's turn to make his grand appearance, because apparently this family had assigned everyone specific scenes in their little drama. He showed up during lunch with takeout from that overpriced burger place downtown, acting like we were long-lost buddies who hadn't seen each other in years. "Thought we could hang out," he said, setting bags of food on my kitchen counter like he was delivering care packages to disaster victims. "You know, brother-to-brother time. Brother-to-brother time." The same guy who'd spent years patronizing me about my career choices suddenly wanted a bond over artisanal burgers and sweet potato fries. The desperation was almost endearing, if you could ignore the fact that he was basically auditioning for a role in my destruction. We ate in relative silence for a while, Adrian occasionally making small talk about work and the weather and other safe topics that wouldn't accidentally reveal the conspiracy they'd all been plotting. But eventually, his amateur hour acting skills started showing through the cracks. "So, big birthday coming up," he said, trying to sound casual, but landing somewhere around serial killer making small talk. 40's a big milestone. Life-changing, you know. Life-changing. There it was again, another not-so-subtle hint about the surprises they had planned for me. These people had all the subtlety of a marching band in a library. "Yeah," I agreed. "I have a feeling it's going to be unforgettable." The look of satisfaction that crossed his face was priceless. He probably thought I was walking blindly into their trap, completely unaware of what they had planned. If only he knew that while he was rehearsing his lines, I'd already written the ending to their little play. Thursday brought Clara's contribution to the week of terrible acting, which consisted of her calling me out of the blue to just chat. Clara, who hadn't initiated a conversation with me in about 3 years, suddenly wanted to catch up on life and see how I was doing. "I was just thinking about you," she said, her voice carrying all the authenticity of a telemarketer reading from a script. You know, with your birthday coming up and everything. 40's such a significant age. Significant. Another loaded word in a week full of them. At this point, they might as well have sent me a formal invitation that read, "Please join us for your public humiliation, RSVP required." But the real comedy came from watching how they interacted with each other during family dinner Friday night. Isabel, Gregory, Adrian, and Claire all sat around our dining room table exchanging meaningful glances and barely suppressed smirks like they were members of some secret society that I was too stupid to notice. They kept making references to surprises and special occasions and how this birthday was going to be memorable for everyone involved. Gregory couldn't stop checking his watch, probably counting down the hours until he could spring his trap. Adrian kept grinning at his food like it had told him a particularly funny joke. Clara was quieter than usual, but I caught her stealing nervous glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. The whole thing felt like watching a community theater production of How to Conspire Against Your Husband, directed by someone who'd never actually seen a play before. They were so obviously pleased with themselves, so convinced of their own cleverness, so certain that they'd outsmarted the guy they'd been underestimating for over a decade. If they'd put half this much planning into something productive, they might have actually accomplished something impressive in their lives. Instead, they'd spent weeks orchestrating what they thought would be my downfall, never realizing that while they were rehearsing their roles, I'd been preparing for the greatest performance of my life. The irony was beautiful. They thought they were directing this little drama, but they had no idea they were actually just actors in a much larger production. And tomorrow, at Bellagio's Steakhouse, they were going to discover that the script they'd memorized was just the opening act of a show that would end very differently than they'd planned. You know that moment in horror movies when the monster finally shows its true face? Yeah, well, welcome to the Holt family's worst nightmare, served up with a side of medium rare ribeye and a garnish of public humiliation. Because if they thought their little birthday ambush was going to end with me crawling away broken and defeated, they were about to learn what happens when you corner a predator who's been pretending to be prey for 12 years. The scene at Bellagio's was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Gregory standing there like Caesar delivering a death sentence, holding those divorce papers like they were the holy grail of family justice. Isabel with her phone ready to capture my destruction for posterity, probably planning to post it on social media with some empowering caption about choosing herself. Adrian smirking like he'd just watched the school bully get what he deserved. Clara trying to disappear into her salad while still sneaking glances at the carnage. They'd choreographed this moment so perfectly, practiced their lines so thoroughly, anticipated my every reaction so completely. What they hadn't anticipated was that I'd spent the last 3 years turning myself into something they couldn't touch, couldn't hurt, couldn't destroy no matter how hard they tried. When I signed those papers without hesitation, without tears, without the dramatic breakdown they'd all been expecting, I watched their perfect little script crumble in real time. Gregory's confident smile flickered like a candle in the wind. Isabel's steady camera hand started shaking. Adrian's smirk transformed into confusion. Clara finally looked up from her food with genuine alarm in her eyes. But that was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. I walked out of that restaurant like a man who'd just been set free instead of destroyed, and I could feel their eyes following me, their minds racing to understand what had gone wrong with their perfect plan. They'd expected chaos. They'd gotten control. They'd wanted destruction. They'd gotten dignity. And they had no idea what to do with any of it. I barely made it to the parking lot when I heard the click 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 of expensive heels on pavement behind me. Isabel, running after me in those designer stilettos she'd probably bought specifically for this occasion, her face flushed with panic and confusion. "Wait," she called out, slightly breathless from her sprint across the parking lot. "This isn't how it was supposed to go." I turned to face her with the calm satisfaction of a chess master who'd just announced checkmate. "How exactly was it supposed to go, Isabel?" She stood there for a moment, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, probably realizing that admitting she'd planned for me to break down and beg would make her look like a sociopath. Which, let's be honest, wasn't far from the truth. That's when I pulled out my phone and dialed Rebecca's number. Not privately, not discreetly, but right there in front of my soon-to-be ex-wife, on speakerphone for maximum dramatic effect. "Rebecca?" I said when she picked up on the second ring. "It's done. Time for the press release." "Excellent," came Rebecca's voice through the speaker. Crisp and professional and absolutely terrifying if you knew what was coming. "I'll have the media statements out within the hour. The financial disclosure documents are already prepared. This should make quite a splash in the business community." Isabel's face went white. Not pale. Not shocked white. But the kind of white you see in people who've just realized they're about to be hit by a freight train and there's nowhere to run. By this time, Gregory, Adrian, and Clara had made their way outside, probably wondering why the guest of honor at their execution party had wandered off instead of staying to be properly humiliated. They approached cautiously, like they were approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. That's when I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope of my own. Not cream-colored or fancy like the one they'd ambushed me with, just a standard manila envelope that contained enough financial documentation to rewrite their understanding of reality. "Gregory," I said, holding out the envelope with the same ceremonial flourish he'd used earlier. "Since we're exchanging gifts tonight, I thought you might find this interesting." He took the envelope with trembling hands, his lawyer instincts probably warning him that whatever was inside was going to change everything. When he opened it and saw the first page, Harrison Ridge Logistics financial statements showing $1.9 billion in company valuation, I watched 30 years of arrogance drain out of his face like water from a broken dam. "This can't be right," he whispered, flipping through page after page of contracts, acquisition reports, revenue statements, and asset valuations. His hands were actually shaking as he processed what he was seeing. Isabel snatched the papers from him, her eyes scanning the numbers like she was trying to decode a foreign language. $1,896 million. She read aloud, her voice getting smaller with each digit. "Billion," I corrected helpfully. $1.9 billion. With Adrian grabbed the documents next, and I watched his face go through the 5 stages of grief in about 30 seconds. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance of the fact that the loser brother-in-law he'd been condescending to for over a decade was worth more money than he could earn in several lifetimes. Clara just stood there with her mouth hanging open, probably trying to reconcile the struggling small business owner they'd all been pitying with the billionaire standing in front of them. "The pharmaceutical contracts alone are worth $30 million annually." I continued conversationally, like I was discussing the weather. "The Pentagon deals are classified, but let's just say Uncle Sam pays very well for reliable service." "Oh, and that acquisition spree I went on last year? Turns out buying distressed companies and turning them profitable is almost embarrassingly easy when you know what you're doing." Gregory was still staring at the papers like they might magically transform into something that made sense. "But your house, your car, you don't live like a billionaire?" I finished for him. "That's because I'm not an idiot, Gregory. I reinvested everything back into the company instead of buying toys to impress people I didn't respect. Funny how that works out." That's when I delivered the coup de grace, the final blow that would haunt their dreams for years to come. "Oh, and about that divorce settlement you were all so excited about," I said, pulling out another document. "My will was rewritten 3 years ago. Everything goes to my niece Sophie when she turns 30. My sister Laura manages the trust until then. Isabel gets exactly $1, along with a very detailed letter explaining why." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear traffic from the highway half a mile away. These people who'd spent 12 years making me feel small and inadequate were finally seeing me as I really was, and the revelation was destroying them. Isabel's legs actually gave out. She had to grab Adrian's arm to keep from falling, and even then she looked like she might collapse right there in the parking lot. Gregory was making these small whimpering sounds, like a dog that had been kicked. Adrian was just standing there with his mouth open, probably calculating how much money he'd spent over the years talking down to a billionaire. "But don't worry," I said with a smile that could have powered the city grid. "I'm sure that senior account manager position at Morrison & Associates will work out great for you, Isabel. $120,000 a year is nothing to sneeze at. Of course, it's roughly what I make in about 6 hours, but who's counting?" I started walking toward my car, then turned back for one final moment of pure theatrical satisfaction. "Oh, and Gregory, next time you want to destroy someone's life, you might want to make sure you actually know who you're dealing with first. Just some free legal advice from your former son-in-law." I drove away from Bellagio's that night with the windows down and music cranked up, laughing like a man who'd just won the greatest game ever played. Behind me, I left 4 people standing in a parking lot, holding divorce papers that had just transformed from a weapon of mass destruction into the key to my freedom. They'd tried to bury me. Instead, they'd just set me free to soar. Chapter 10, Freedom at Last. You know what freedom sounds like? It sounds like driving through downtown Chicago at midnight with the windows down, music blasting, and not a single person in the world who can make you feel small anymore. It sounds like your phone buzzing with desperate text messages from people who finally realize they've been playing chess with a grandmaster while thinking they were teaching checkers to a child. The first text came before I'd even made it home from Bellagio's. Isabel, of course, because denial is apparently hereditary in the Holt family. "We need to talk. This changes everything. This changes everything." "No shit, Sherlock. Sherlock. This changes everything." This changes everything. No shit, Sherlock. 12 years of marriage, and it took finding out I was worth $2 billion for her to think we needed to have a conversation. I deleted it without responding, and cranked up the stereo another notch. By the time I pulled into my driveway, soon to be my former driveway, thank God, she'd sent 6 more messages. Each one more desperate than the last. Cycling through anger, bargaining, and what I could only assume was the beginning stages of a complete psychological breakdown. You lied to me for years. How could you hide something this big? We can work this out. We can make this work. Please call me. We need to figure this out. I love you. I've always loved you. Don't throw away 12 years over hurt feelings. I sat in my car for a few minutes, reading through her pathetic attempts to rewrite history, and I couldn't stop laughing. This was the same woman who'd been planning my financial destruction with her father just days ago, and now she was declaring her eternal love because she'd discovered I wasn't the loser she thought she'd married. The voicemail started around 2 in the morning. Gregory, naturally, because the man never could admit defeat gracefully. His first message was pure corporate lawyer, all threats and bluster about how this wouldn't stand, how there had to be fraud involved, how he'd find a way to challenge everything. By the fourth voicemail, recorded around 4 a.m. based on the timestamp, his tone had shifted to something approaching desperation. The great Gregory Holt, reduced to leaving rambling drunk messages about how we could work something out and how families should stick together and how maybe he'd misjudged the situation. Misjudged the situation. That was one way to put it. Adrian, to his credit, at least had the self-awareness to disappear entirely. No calls, no texts, no pathetic attempts to salvage his relationship with the brother-in-law he'd spent years treating like his personal punching bag. The guy just vanished into whatever hole people crawl into when they realize they've been an asshole to someone who could buy their entire life with pocket change. Clara sent exactly one text. I'm sorry. Short, simple, and probably the most honest communication I'd ever received from any member of that family. But here's the beautiful thing about having real power. You don't have to respond to any of it. You don't have to engage with the desperate attempts at manipulation or the last-minute declarations of love or the threats from people who suddenly realize they have no leverage. You can just ignore them. Because what are they going to do? Divorce me? Take half my assets? Ruin my reputation? Too late, assholes. You already played that card. I spent the weekend in my home office, not hiding but planning. Rebecca called Saturday morning to inform me that the business press had picked up the story about Harrison Ridge Logistics, and apparently my company's valuation was causing quite a stir in industry circles. Turned out that when a small regional trucking company suddenly reveals itself to be a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire, people tend to pay attention. Forbes wants an interview, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. So does the Wall Street Journal and about 12 different business podcasts. You've become quite the overnight sensation. Overnight sensation. If only they knew it had taken 12 years of being treated like garbage to build this overnight success. Set up the interviews, I told her. It's time people knew the real story. Within 2 weeks, I'd found a penthouse in downtown Chicago that cost more than most people's houses and had a view of the lake that made me feel like I owned the entire city. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was moving from the suburban house that represented everything the Holts thought I should aspire to, into a home that represented everything I'd actually achieved. The moving process was therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Each box packed, each piece of furniture left behind, each memory of 12 years of slowly dying inside. All of it, just, gone. I kept what mattered and left the rest for Isabel to deal with. She could have the house, the furniture, the life we'd built together. I was building something better. Harrison Ridge Logistics expanded into 3 new markets within a month of the divorce being finalized. Turned out that when people know you're worth $2 billion, they take your phone calls a lot faster. The Pentagon increased my contracts by 40%. 2 major pharmaceutical companies signed exclusive shipping agreements. And a tech startup in Silicon Valley offered me $100 million just to handle their logistics for their IPO rollout. I hired a new CFO, a brilliant woman named Sandra who'd previously worked for Amazon and understood global supply chains better than most people understand their own neighborhoods. I brought on a team of analysts who could spot acquisition opportunities I'd never even considered. I opened offices in Seattle, Atlanta, and Phoenix. The empire I'd built in secret while the Holts dismissed me as a failure was finally free to grow into what it was always meant to become. But the real victory wasn't the money or the business expansion or the recognition from industry, peers who suddenly wanted to be my best friend. The real victory was the silence. The blessed, beautiful silence of a life without constant criticism, without daily reminders of how I wasn't good enough, without the exhausting effort of trying to prove my worth to people who were determined never to see it. My evenings were my own now. Quiet dinners with good whiskey, reading books that interested me instead of pretending to care about whatever drama Isabel was obsessing over, planning business strategies that excited me instead of pretending to care about whatever drama Isabel was obsessing over, planning business strategies that excited me instead of dreading the next family gathering where I'd be treated like the help. I started dating, casually at first, then more seriously when I met Elena, a surgeon at Northwestern who understood ambition and success and didn't need me to apologize for either. She looked at my accomplishments with admiration instead of embarrassment, treated my success as something to celebrate instead of something to hide. The contrast was stunning. Here was a woman who saw strength where the Holts had seen weakness, intelligence where they'd seen inadequacy, success where they'd seen failure. Being with Elena reminded me what it felt like to be valued for who I was instead of criticized for who I wasn't. 6 months after the divorce, Gregory died of a heart attack at his desk, probably triggered by the stress of watching his perfect plan backfire so spectacularly. I didn't attend the funeral. Isabel called, crying, asking if I'd come support the family during this difficult time. I hung up without responding. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Adrian eventually reached out through a mutual business contact, apparently having landed a new job at a firm that wanted to explore partnerships with Harrison Ridge Logistics. The request was professional, respectful, and completely transparent about his motivations. I had Rebecca send back a polite but firm rejection. Some mistakes don't deserve second chances. Clara married a teacher from Wisconsin and moved to Milwaukee, sending me a wedding invitation that I actually appreciated, not because I planned to attend, but because it was honest. No manipulation, no hidden agenda, just an acknowledgement that life goes on and people change. Isabel found her new job at Morrison & Associates, just like she'd planned. $120,000 a year, decent benefits, regular hours. Everything she'd wanted when she was plotting my destruction. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was dating someone from her office, a middle manager who drove a sensible sedan and took her to chain restaurants for date nights. She got exactly the life she'd chosen. Small, safe, predictable, and completely forgettable. For my 41st birthday, I threw a party at my penthouse. Not for family, fuck that noise, but for friends, business partners, people who knew my value and had never questioned my worth. Elena gave a toast about second chances and new beginnings. Rebecca raised her glass to the sweetest revenge being massive success. Sandra presented me with projections showing Harrison Ridge Logistics on track to hit $3 billion in valuation within 2 years. I looked around the room at these people who respected me, valued me, and genuinely enjoyed my company, and I realized something profound. The Holts hadn't just failed to destroy me. They'd actually set me free. Their divorce papers, meant to be my death sentence, had turned out to be my liberation. Their public humiliation, designed to break me, had become my public vindication. Their attempt to take half of what they thought was a failing business had resulted in them getting exactly nothing from what turned out to be a financial empire. They tried to bury me, never realizing that I wasn't a victim to be destroyed. I was a seed, waiting for the right conditions to grow into something magnificent. And now, finally, I was free to bloom.